Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish Podcast. It is me, Jim Hill, and this is our show for the week of Schmersday, August 4th, 2025. And as you may have noticed from that modified version of our standard show opening, there's a distinct lack of Len Testa to this particular edition of this podcast. But that's because my partner in crime is off doing daddy-daughter stuff, which is the sort of thing we actually encourage around here. Anyway, Mr. Testa will be back in the saddle next week, so don't worry. In Len's absence, I have arranged for another beloved figure from the online Disneyana community to fill in, and that's AJ Wolfe from the Disney Food Blog. By the way, Ms. Wolfe has just written a terrific new book that touches on that very same topic, the online Disneyana fan community, I mean. It's entitled Disney Adults Exploring and Falling in Love with a Magical Subculture, and that hardcover with Simon & Schuster is sending out into the world via its Gallery Books division. It hits store shelves, tomorrow, Tuesday, August 5th. What an amazing coinkydink. Anyway, AJ will be discussing her book on the feature story portion of this podcast, which typically follows the news. And speaking of which, the news portion of today's edition of Disney Dish is brought to you by UnlockedMagic.com, which is an emissions media operation run by our friends over at the DVCRentalStore.com. And if you're headed to Walt Disney World and or the Universal Orlando Resort and are looking to visit their theme parks, well, UnlockedMagic.com can get you great discounts on your admission media, sometimes upwards of 12%. Just pick your dates, grab your tickets, and then you're on your way with more cash to spend on, who knows, Fantastic Four themed merch. And speaking of the Fantastic Four, that Marvel Studio movie was #1 at the box office this past weekend. More to the point, that Matt Shakman movie, which has only been out in theaters for, 10 days at this point, has already made more than $250 million worldwide, which has to be making the suits at the Team Disney Burbank building happy. Now, on the theme park side of things, guests who visit the original Disneyland Park in Anaheim, Walt Disney Studios Park at the Disneyland Paris Resort, and even Hong Kong Disneyland now have the opportunity to do meet and greets with Marvel's first family. But not the folks visiting Florida. Nope. The Universal Orlando Resort, thanks to that master licensing agreement they signed with Marvel back in March of 1994, they have the exclusive theme park rights to the Fantastic Four east of the Mississippi. Hell, Universal Islands Adventure in their Superhero Island area, they even have a restaurant that's themed around the thing, Mr. Fantastic, the Invisible Woman, and the Human Torch. That restaurant is called Cafe 4 and serves pizza, pasta, that sort of stuff. So, long story short, don't expect to see the Fantastic Four at any of the Disney theme parks in Florida, though I have heard that Ben Grimm and Herbie will be doing meet and greets on certain Disney Cruise Line boats that sail out of Florida. Now, but mind you, these characters can only come out after these ships have entered international waters, which, as I understand it, is just far enough from the continental United States to then keep Disney in compliance with that whole east of the Mississippi language that's in the master licensing agreement that Universal signed with Marvel, 3 years ago? Anyway, speaking of Florida, I forgot to acknowledge our Patreon subscribers every week. Len and I salute a handful of these nice folks. They're the ones who support Disney Unpacked, which is that video series we do with veteran imaginator Jim Schul. And what's really interesting about our Patreon subscriber is, well, oftentimes they wind up with really interesting jobs around the Walt Disney World Resort. I mean, take, for example, Carrie Andrews, Cameron Blum, Kate, and Pablo. These folks are relatively new hires at the Mouse House, and they're part of the team that's handling demolition at Disney's Hollywood Studios these days, which means that they're the ones who are pulling down structures over at Muppet Studios as that park preps to begin construction of the Monsters, Inc. Doors coaster. They'll also soon be over in the animation courtyard at that same theme park, tearing up concrete as the Star Wars launch bay gets transformed into, well, an all-new version of the old MGM Magic of Disney Animation exhibit. But I have to tell you guys, people who work in construction, they can be a cruel bunch. And the veterans who are leading these demolition projects over at the studio, they've been, as I hear it, mercilessly teasing the newbies, sending them off on silly errands like telling these new hires, again, we're talking Carrie, Cameron, Kate, and Pablo, we need specific tools for these jobs. So go back to the equipment shed and tell them all the backhoes and bulldozers we have in sight, they just won't do. Tell them we need the really specialized stuff like the front hose and the cow dozers. Again, see what I'm saying? Cruel, but still silly pranks. By the way, speaking of the demo work that's going on at Disney's Hollywood Studios, thanks to friend of the show, BioReconstruct, and his recent flyover of that theme park, we now know that the Stage 1 company store, this was the gift shop directly across the way from the exit of Muppet Vision 3D, is no more. I mean, that building has been flattened. Likewise, the faux tenement building, this used to serve as the backdrop for the Phineas and Ferb meet and greet that used to be staged in this part of the park. I mean, just around the corner from Mama Melrose, that's gone too. So, end result is there is now basically a piece of straight pipe that runs from where guests used to enter Muppet Studios off of Grand Avenue, back to where, eventually walking in this direction, guests will be able to enter the Door Coaster building in Monsters, Inc. Land at some point in 2027. By the way, again, thanks to our buddy BioReconstruct, we now know at least what shape the foundation of the gravity building that will house this coaster will take. The site prep team has carved a very specific shape out of the asphalt that used to pave MGM's old parking lot. And by the way, there are already backhoes on site creating the drainage ditches that will then circle this massive structure. And so just to be clear here, they are not kidding around when it comes to transforming the old Muppet Studio section of Disney's Hollywood Studios into Monsters, Inc. Land. The people who are working on this project are motivated. This thing is moving at speed, folks. Now, I wish I could say the same about what's going on with Encanto Land over at Disney's Animal Kingdom, but friend of the show, Nate the Great, he was over in that theme park just this past Friday, and I'm not saying how exactly. Maybe Nate borrowed an ability from Mr. Fantastic and was able to stretch himself to the point that he could peer over the construction fence that now surrounds the old Chester and Hester's Dinorama. But according to Nate, there is no vertical construction going on over there. Not yet, anyway. And I bring this up because it's worth noting that even though we had a new Zootopia 2 trailer drop just this past week, by the way, at this point, we are just 3 months and 3 weeks out from when that Walt Disney Animation Studio production arrives in theaters, November of this year. And Nate, as he walked around Disney's Animal Kingdom, thought it was interesting that there's nothing up inside of this park promoting the upcoming release of that Zootopia sequel, which, when you think about this, the Tree of Life in that same park, the icon, the thesis attraction, that's supposed to become home to Zootopia Zoo Better Together. which is a 3D movie thing that's supposed to replace It's Tough to Be a Bug. It just seems a little weird to me that with that attraction coming, there's nothing out there in the park for Zootopia 2 yet. I mean, Disney's usually better about these sorts of things when it comes to using the parks to promote upcoming films. And you'd think, again, well, with the release of Zootopia 2 being so close and Zootopia, Zoo Better together, that attraction's supposed to open in Animal Kingdom, well, soon. Speaking of which, I've heard from a number of folks that the previously announced holiday 2025 opening for this attraction now isn't happening. At this point, it's actually sounding more likely that Zootopia Zoo Better together might open in the first quarter of 2026. But I want to stress here, the accent in that last sentence should be placed on the word might. On the other hand, something that actually did happen before midnight this past Wednesday, July 30th, was... okay, it was dark. There was a thunderstorm moving through the Disney World area at the time, which made for miserable visibility, bad conditions for the poor pilot of the General Joe Potter. That's the ferry, or one of the ferries that transports guests who parked in the main parking lot for the Magic Kingdom over to the park itself. Anyway, they were trying to get a boatload of guests across Seven Seas Lagoon to the Ticket and Transportation Center. At this point, nobody knows exactly what happened. This incident is currently under investigation. And while I am extremely reluctant to use the word crash, what is known at this point is that the General Joe Potter came in hard. And when it hit the dock, well, given the slick conditions, remember it had been raining due to the thunderstorm moving through the Magic Kingdom Resort area, and the force of the impact, a number of people were thrown to the deck. And as a direct result, it's been reported that 15 people, possibly more, were taken to area hospitals, some of them with pretty serious injuries. Have to tell you, I have reached out to a friend in transportation to see if I can get any additional information, because Disney's being really tight-lipped about this. But it's important to remember here that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, since he dissolved the Reedy Creek Improvement District back in June of 2023 and then set up the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, there were things that Disney used to have control over that it doesn't anymore, like accident investigations. And remember how in that same year, 2023, DeSantis put Florida's Department of Transportation in charge of Walt Disney World's monorail system. And as it was explained to me, that same sort of thing now applies to the ferry system. So right now there's supposedly some kind of a tussle going on behind the scenes about who gets to lead this investigation in regard to what happened to the General Joe Potter. Anyway, Len and I will keep an eye on the story and let you know what we hear, okay? All right, and we have time for one piece of listener mail this week, which comes from John Gossett, which reads, "Hi, Len and Jim. I was just listening to the latest Disney Dish episode and heard you discussing the Legend of Captain Jack Sparrow attraction at Hollywood Studios. I don't recall where I heard this, but I remember someone telling me that this attraction was intended as a test bed for the projection technology used in Shanghai Disneyland's Pirates attraction, and that the Jack Sparrow effect was later then used for the Ray effect in Rise of the Resistance. Do you know if this is in fact the case?" And all right, again, Mr. Testa's out and about, so I will answer John's question. And so, John, hey, thanks for writing in. But to try to answer your question, off the top of my head, I don't know if this was really the case, but just to be sure, let me reach out to a few folks who actually worked on the Legend of Captain Jack Sparrow. I have to anyway, because we really need to push on with that yet-to-be-finished series about pirates in the Disney parks. Now, Jason Sorrell, who rode herd on this attraction of Disney's Hollywood studio. Jason, I should mention, is the author of a number of truly excellent books about the Disney parks. Among them, Disney Mountains, Imagineering at its Peak, The Haunted Mansion, From the Magic Kingdom to the Movies, and its companion volume, The Art of the Haunted Mansion. Not to mention Pirates of the Caribbean, From the Magic Kingdom to the Movies. He once talked about directing Johnny Depp for the footage that John is specifically talking about here, that projection effect. And Jason said that Johnny could not have been kinder, more gracious, and was eager to serve this material as anyone else I've ever worked with. And, Mr. Depp was a total pro and a true collaborator. And mind you, I'm also reading another book about Mr. Depp, Hollywood Vampires. This one's by Kelly Loudenberg and Makiko Holy, which paints a somewhat different picture of Johnny. This book, which comes from Deist, which is a division of William Morrow, the subtitle tells you everything. It's Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, and the Celebrity Exploitation Machine. And I got to tell you, book's a little tabloidy for my taste. But that said, Hollywood Vampires does offer up a bit of insight about why Mr. Depp plays Captain Jack the way that he does or did. And this section reads that even though Johnny would eventually be paid a reported $265 million to appear in those 5 pirate films for Disney, his focus was always on the role, or rather his performance of that role, rather than the paycheck. To hear Depp talk, my job is the character, and there is no difference in my approach, whether the part is in a teeny indie western or a huge Disney franchise. Which reminds me, am I the only person on the planet who actually liked Disney's Lone Ranger? Now, mind you, I sincerely believe that movie would have been better, would have been a bigger success if Disney had shot the original screenplay that Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio wrote for that film. And you see, in that version of Disney's Lone Ranger, well, there was a reason that the man in the mask always kept silver bullets in his 6-shooter. You see, Bruce Cavendish, he was the bad guy in this Disney film, and also in the Lone Ranger radio show and the TV series. Well, Butch and his gang weren't just bad guys. They were werewolves. Seriously. In fact, if you go back today and watch this 2013 release from Disney Studios, there's this very weird scene in The Lone Ranger where Butch Cavendish actually rips out a guy's heart and then eats it. Which is the one remaining piece from the original version of Ted Elliott and Terry Russio's version of this script. And to this day, I don't know how Disney, with that scene, somehow convinced the MPAA that, the Lone Ranger, oh, come on, PG-13. Kids today, they don't bother by people eating hearts. Just a second, I guess I should clarify that what Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio were proposing as the villains for Disney's Lone Ranger initially, well, they weren't werewolves in the traditional sense, but rather Wendigos, which are the supernatural creatures that the indigenous people of the American plains feared. For lack of a better term, these creatures that were going to be in this Disney movie were were-coyotes. Not Wile E. Coyote, but were-coyotes. Anyways, it was explained to me, executives at Disney Studios asked that the Wendigo plot thread be cut out of The Lone Ranger, largely because they thought it was just a little too similar to the undead pirate crew thing that Gore Verbinski had previously done with Curse of the Black Pearl, the first installment of Disney's pirate movie franchise, which is a favorite of both little kids and Disney adults. And when we get back from this break, AJ Wolfe from the Disney Food blog will then join me to discuss her terrific new book on this very same topic, Disney Adults, not Undead Pirates. Anyway, but first, this.
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Earn 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. And with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
Your backyard barbecue has some new RSVPs. Just tap Target. With the grill raring to go, your personal shopper is tackling your same-day delivery order at Target.
Babe, so Bob and Lynn are bringing the kids after all.
Pro tip, you can change your same-day order with a quick text to your shopper.
I'll have her add popsicles. Ooh, and some sidewalk chalk.
Your shopper texts a thumbs up. You text 5 exclamation points and life is good. Text with a personal shopper and get it all delivered ASAP. Just tap Target.
It's summer. Time to enjoy long days, lazy nights, and zero cooking. Because Uber Eats has deals all summer long. So, when hunger strikes, don't sweat it. Delicious deals are just a tap away on Uber Eats. Enjoy all your favorite food delivered straight to you. Get Burger King, Subway, Popeyes, and hundreds more local favorites and savor every last bite. Now that sounds like a good summer. Order now on Uber Eats. Terms apply. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
And we're back. Okay, for this week's feature, because Mr. Testa and I got such a nice response to our 2-part interview with Don Hahn and Chris Merritt, they're the authors of The Happiest Place on Earth, the incredible story of Walt Disney's Disneyland, a great new coffee table book, takes an in-depth look at the world's first theme park. Anyway, I thought we'd keep that trend going and bring in another author to discuss their new book. And no, I'm not just doing this because Len is off having fun with his daughter Hannah, or because today's guest, well, she didn't grow up here in New Hampshire, but she did go to school at UNH over in Raynham. But I want her on the show today because I think she wrote an important book, one that shines a spotlight on a subject that listeners to this podcast know very, very well, and that's Disney adults. By the way, AJ throws down the gauntlet with her book, which, write this down, folks. It's called Disney Adulting, Exploring and Falling in Love with a Magical Subculture. And I guess I should also mention that this 272-page hardcover is being published by Gallery Books, a division of Simon & Schuster, and hits store shelves tomorrow, Tuesday, August 5th. Anyway, AJ throws down the gauntlet pretty quickly in her Disney adult book, given that, chapter 1 of this book is entitled The Most Hated Group on the Internet. But seriously, folks, do not let that throw you. This book, it's not just well-written and researched, but its author, you know her because she's the huge talent behind the super popular Disney food blog, and that's AJ Wolfe. But before we get started here, what makes Disney Adults a really great read is AJ. It's not just some outsider looking in on the Disney adulting phenomenon and then passing judgment, rather, but it's kind of the ultimate Disney adult telling you the story from the inside, sharing all sorts of fascinating anecdotes and from her own personal life and weaving in interesting stories from other members of the Disney adult community. Not to mention dropping, all sorts of illuminating behind-the-scenes info about the Disney company. It's a flat-out fascinating read. Actually plowed through this book twice before today's sit-down. Got to tell you, wasn't always comfortable with what I was reading at Disney Adults, but made me think about how I wound up with the job I have today, which, by the way, I love. But even so, in the years that it took Mr. Testa and I to get here, build Disney Dish into what it is today, I can't tell you the number of times I had friends or family say, "What, you're going to Disney again?" And if you've ever had anyone close to you say the exact same thing, well, that's why you really need to read Disney Adults, the terrific new book from author AJ Wolfe. So welcome to the show today, AJ, and thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, Jim. I'm so excited to be here. This is it's iconic to finally talk to you, chat with you.
That's a polite way of saying I'm older than dirt. Okay,
so am I.
Oh, well, that's a. But now, speaking of which, though, I am fascinated by your story about how your love of the Disney parks actually got started in an interesting sort of way by you sitting at home and watching the TGIF thing on ABC. That programming block, and what was it? It was especially the episodes where characters from like Full House or Boy Meets World would go to Walt Disney World, right?
Right, exactly. Blossom and her family went to Disney World, and yeah, Full House, like all these Friday night shows, because they were ABC shows. So of course ABC is trying to promote Disney. I didn't know that at the time. I was like, it's working. I want to go to Disney World now.
Well, and it's so funny because you and I actually share a similar origin story. It was actually, for me, it was an episode of the Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color that sent me down this exact same path. I was a 5-year-old boy who was obsessed with dinosaurs, and I just remember seeing the footage from the episode they did about the 1964 World's Fair, where it's Walt playing or interacting with the animatronic baby brontosauruses that they built for the Magic Skyway show, and it's like, oh, what's that? I must learn more. But anyway, speaking of learning more, let's talk now about the origins of the Disney food blog, which I'm sure, again, a lot of Disney Dish listeners are familiar with. So how did that get started?
Yeah, a Disney food blog started when my husband and I, he was my boyfriend at the time, he was living in Dallas, Texas, and I was living in New York City, and we wanted a hobby we could do together. And he was a software developer and was interested in website development. And so we're like, okay, well, let's start some websites. And my passion, not necessarily his passion, but my passion was Disney, and specifically Disney food, which I knew wasn't really being talked about at a high level at the time. There was lots of good fan sites, lots of good message boards going on, but nobody was really deep diving into food to the point that they were sharing a ton of photos of what you would get when you went to Disney restaurants. And so I was like, I want this website to exist. And so we built it.
And this is important to explain because, again, you would here in 2025 and looking at the plethora of options of people covering the Disney food space. But back in 2009, when you and your boyfriend, now husband, were getting this thing up out of the ground, this was the frontier, right? I mean, this was a wide open space.
Yeah, it really was. And also, back then, Jim, when you put up a website or a blog post, the photos were tiny and they were kind of spaced out in the post. You didn't see a lot of photos. And so what we did with Disney Food Blog is we put giant photos, and a ton of them, into every single blog post. And so that was brand new in the space. Nobody was doing that yet. And because food is such a visual topic, I really wanted to make sure people were seeing what they would get if they went to these restaurants and ordered this stuff. So that was, and now that's all you see is, when you're going to a blog post, you're just scrolling and looking at the pictures at this point.
Okay, but if we could take a step back to the Stone Age, of this, I mean, can you talk about what it took to, for example, cover something like food and wine? Because this was a very labor-intensive process in the day, and even today is a labor-intensive process.
Yeah, back in the day, nobody was covering those Epcot festivals. I mean, at the time, really only Food and Wine had a bunch of food booths, right? Sure. Even Flower and Garden didn't have a bunch of food booths at that time. And so I decided that I wanted to go to every single booth on day one and show people everything they could potentially get and let them know what was worth their money and what wasn't. And I think I was the first one to do that, to cover every single booth on day one. And I did it all by myself, which was, for several years, did it all by myself, which was exhausting. everybody was like, "Oh, don't you love the first day of Food and Wine?" I was like, "No, I hate it. it's so exhausting." And I was, by the end of that day, I was usually hallucinating booths. Like there was suddenly there's another booth that I didn't cover yet, and I had to go cover it. And then I would go to Jelly Rolls afterwards and edit all the photos. I'd stay there till 1:45 a.m. when the lights came up, and I would edit all the photos, and I'd put everything into the blog post, and I would get everything out immediately so that people knew what made sense to get at the festival. But yeah, I mean, that was a lot. It was definitely baptism by fire when when I had days like that in Disney World where I was just eating 6 meals and going to all the booths and all of that stuff, but gotta cover. I'm a completionist.
Well, no, and that's a trait you share with Mr. Testa over.
I do.
And in fact, Len talks about this exact same time when, again, putting on a stirring plan or unofficial guide hat, where this was at a time when, for example, the menus to the individual restaurants on Disney property were not available anywhere online.
Not published.
Yeah.
No.
And so, in order to get the menu, let's be honest here, it was Chrissy, Len's sister, who was actually, walking into the restaurants, getting the photographs, taking them home, transcribing them, putting them up online. But again, it was you, Len, Chrissy, who, were really the pioneers of what now has become this huge thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And All Ears was also a great website to get menus at the time. They would go get all the menus too, but it was only pretty much that group of folks because Disney didn't even publish their menus back then.
No.
It seems shocking, kids. I know, but they didn't publish menus. You didn't see any food photos. There was no food going on the Disney website except the names of the restaurants. That's it.
And in fact, what we were talking about this yesterday. These days, when I walk into the opening day of, say, Food and Wine or Flower and Garden, and I then see, well, first of all, I can't get close to a single trash can in the park because people have made it into a photo stand where they are now getting the beauty shot of the entree that's at Canada or whatever. But that's all on the back of what you guys did, you and Deb and Len and Chrissy.
Yeah, I think so. And there were 5 or 6 websites back then that were just doing the Lord's work when it comes to making sure that people knew what to expect at Disney and not having to read the party line from Disney themselves, right? Which I think is critical when you're traveling, right? You see Yelp and TripAdvisor now. Very, very important in any trip you're going to plan. And so we were kind of doing that work back then.
No, absolutely. And so from 2009 to today, you grew the Disney food blog into something that, ironically enough, you're the one who influenced the influencers, which is what then put you on Simon & Schuster's radar, right?
I hope so. Yeah,
Okay.
I think.
All
Yeah.
right. So let's talk about how Disney Disney Adults came along.
Yeah. So Disney Adults came along because Simon & Schuster, well, the New York Times did a feature about me. I got to take a New York Times food writer to Disneyland and walk them through that park and eat a bunch of stuff. And Simon & Schuster reached out and was basically like, we've been keeping an eye on what you're doing. We think you should do a book. My editor is a huge Disney adult. She does a bunch of cosplay and moved down to Orlando during COVID to live closer to Disney. And so she said, I think someone should write about this topic. And while it's a very... it's a fraught with peril topic because there are a lot of stereotypes and everybody's got an opinion about Disney adults. It was a fascinating topic to research and to work on.
And after this break, folks, so we're going to get into some specifics about this terrific new book that AJ's written. But first, this.
Are you a forward thinker? Then you need an HR and finance platform that thinks like you do. Workday is the AI platform that helps propel your organization, your workforce, and your industry into the future. Workday, moving business forever forward.
Jif peanut butter. It's that Jiffing good, it doesn't really need advertising. So instead, enjoy the calming sounds of the ocean. Jif. Ooh, Tiffing good. Get your Jif at Jif.com.
Who says you can't be the topic of conversation for all the right reasons? The Hyundai Tucson Hybrid pairs bold presence with advanced technology and sleek style. It's everything you didn't know you needed in an SUV and then some. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more.
And we're back. Before we get started here again, talking about AJ Wolfe's terrific new book, Disney Adults Exploring and Falling in Love with a Magical Subculture. I wanted to get things started here by pulling a quote out of the first chapter of AJ's book, which states, "Ask a Disney fan if they're a Disney adult, and most of the time, you'll get a whole lot of hemming and hawing. Well, Disney adults are different than adults who love Disney, some folks might say, and people know that the term is fraught with stereotypes, and most of us don't think that we fit all of them. Most Disney adults shy away from owning the label, believing that their fandom is more sophisticated, layered, unique, and than what the stereotype portrays, and it is. And that's why you and I are here now. Disney adults can be selfish and immature, but they can also be balanced, well-rounded people who are incredibly generous of spirit and focused on a world where kindness can and should win." First of all, AJ, that's some genuinely great writing. But second of all, we are so lucky that editor, Simon & Schuster, recruited you to write a book about Disney adults, because you, being on the inside of this phenomena as you are, could take a really more informed, nuanced approach to the topic. And which is why I love how, as you read this book, you meet people like Jared and Lindsay, cast members in the Finding Nemo the musical, who in the middle of COVID actually went from performing on Broadway to moving down to Orlando so that they could then continue to do the job they loved at the place they adored. So, how did you chase down people like Jared and Lindsay?
Great question. This is a question that not many folks are asking, but the bottom line is I have an incredible audience for Disney Food Blog, and a huge opportunity to reach out to them and get their stories, right? And so partially a big chunk of the people I interviewed for the book in terms of Disney adults themselves, right? Not the psychologists and the all of those folks, but and the journalists and whatever, but the Disney adults, a lot of them came from my audience because I put out hey, does anybody want to talk about this? And I got hundreds and hundreds of responses from these incredible people who follow us. And I read every single one of them, and I used them as inspiration to guide, okay, what are we going to talk about in this book? And so a lot of folks came from that. Jared and Lindsay are an interesting story because Lindsay was in Wicked for many, 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 many years.
No.
And
wow.
on Broadway. And
Yeah.
I had gotten an email from the makeup supervisor at Wicked saying, hey, we're big fans of Disney Food Blog. We watch it. We watch the YouTube channel in the green, backstage
Oh God!
between.
Please tell me that it isn't the green room, right? They're called.
It's not the green room.
Oh,
They
okay.
watch it backstage.
Okay, all right. So
and so they said, hey, do you want to come down, or do you want to come up to New York and see the show, and we'll give you a backstage tour and everything. We'd love to have you. And Lindsay was one of those folks who kind of gave me the backstage tour. So that's how I first met Lindsay. And so when they moved down to Orlando during COVID, I kept in touch with them. They were on a few All Ears videos for us. And so that's sort of my experience with Jared and Lindsay. So they didn't necessarily come from my audience, but they sort of did.
That is so cool. But I have to tell you, this is also what I love about this. Like, again, I work this side of the street. So it's something, for example, when I read into stuff I never knew about the company. Like, for example, you found out that 61% of the subscribers to Disney Plus are white, or how, for example, the majority of Disney fans online are female. Though, given what you just said, I'm thinking you probably pulled that bit of research from the Disney Food blog as well, right?
I wanted to have a broader demographic data set than just my audience. Because I am a woman, my content is a certain type of content. So I really searched. Disney does not publish demographic data, as even Len know. And so it is very hard to figure out who's going to Disney World. So I kind of had to come through a back door and look at Disney Plus subscriber data and all of all of that sort of thing, and who is who's traveling to Florida, kind of thing, that sort of data, to figure out what is a Disney adult. How many of us are women or men? How many of us are white or a different race? So it was very hard to figure that out, but I wanted to do the due diligence to make sure when I'm talking about stereotypes, I can back up what we're saying.
Well, and this book does that in spades. But the other thing that really, really impressed me about Disney Adult is how up to date this book is. I mean, right up to the minute. I mean, you mentioned the just announced Abu Dhabi project, which was 5 minutes ago. I mean,
no, I know. I actually had to stop. I had to call the editor. I had to call the publisher. I was like, we got to stop the presses. We got to get this in there.
Wow. All right. Speaking of which, when did you finish writing the book?
I mean, final copy was probably April.
Oh, holy cow. All right. Well, and that's the beauty of it. It reads right up to the moment. And more to the point, you have a lot of people who I know and respect from the online Disney community who agreed to take part in this project. In fact, one of my favorite quotes comes from Carly Wiesel. Carly defends Disney Adults by saying that this hobby, this activity, this obsession, it allows you to feel joy as an adult, which is it's important to do sometimes because adulthood is hard.
Exactly. Adulthood is very hard. And that's what I heard from a lot of Disney adults was you often don't get the chance to feel genuinely happy or joyful as an adult because you're too busy trying to figure out how to survive. And so the opportunity to go someplace that's like, nope, this is exactly what you're supposed to do here, is really a gift to all of us. And there ends up being a little bit of, I guess, pity for people that don't realize how to take advantage of that.
And another thing I want to stress here about this book is that you actually include parts of your own life story in Disney Adult. And again, not necessarily things that people wouldn't necessarily want to put in this part, like how you talk about how the newest trips you were making to the Disney resorts, you suddenly looked at your credit card statement. It's like, $17,000. And then took a step back and began to question your choices. And that was kind of brave to do, wasn't it?
I knew that the thing that makes my content, I think, useful is the honesty and the relatability in it and the authenticity of it, because I usually don't shy away from sharing my mistakes with people who are going to Disney World. And so I share my mistakes that I made the last time I went to Disney World, and then it helps them not make those. And so it's the same thing here with this book. I wanted it to be intensely personal. I didn't want it to be all about me, which it's not. I'm just a thread in it.
No.
But I did want to absolutely say, hey, man, I'm not just talking about, data that I'm finding online. I myself was in $17,000 of debt in my 20s because I kept going to Disney World. So it's coming. You're getting it from the horse's mouth. Like, this is the source. I was addicted. This is what, and it's okay. It's okay if you're going through something similar. Like, people are obsessed with certain things in their life, whether it's, oh, did that person text me back, or something as big as, credit card debt because of, an addiction of some sort. And so I thought it was really important to get that in the book. I wanted to make sure people saw that I'm not just making this up. Like, I lived it.
Well, that editor at Simon & Schuster sure didn't make a mistake when they recruited you to write a book about the Disney adult phenomena. This is a well-written, genuinely informative book, written by somebody who knows that world maybe a little too well. Which is why, seriously, I urge Disney Dish listeners to go out and buy a copy of this. And just a reminder, this is Disney adults exploring and falling in love with a magical subculture. That's being published by Gallery Books, and it hits store shelves tomorrow, which is Tuesday, August 5th. So thank you so much, AJ, for coming on today's Disney Dish to discuss the book. It's been a treat.
Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it. And I know that Len snuck out didn't have to talk to me. So let me know when I'm coming back on to admonish him for that.
All right. And again, next time I'll make sure to lock the door so Testa didn't slip away. Wasn't that great? By the way, if you like great stuff, be sure and head over to YouTube and check out Disney Journey with Jim Schul. This veteran Imagineer, Len and Mai's collaborator on the Disney Impact video series, has been posting some truly entertaining and informative shows over there. And speaking of which, toward the end of this week, Mr. Schul will be continuing his series on the rides of Toy Story Land. And this time around, Jim talks about all things Slinky Dog related, including Slinky Dog Dash, the coaster found at Disney's Hollywood Studios. Looking ahead now to next week's edition of Disney Dish. Well, Mr. Testa will be back by then, so hopefully Len will have some fun stories to share about his time away. Anyway, this podcast is produced spectacularly by Eric Hersey and David Gray, who for weeks now have been chopping and then roasting peppers out ahead of their trip to Hatch Valley in New Mexico, where they plan on entering Grandma Gray's 5-alarm chili in this year's competition at the Hatch Valley Chili Festival, which in 2025 is celebrating its 53rd anniversary. That'll be held on August 30th and 31st. By the way, David advises you to wear a bib when tucking into a bowl of Grandma Gray's chili. Not just because it's messy, but rather he's serious about this 5-alarm thing. By that I mean this stuff will burn a hole in your shirt if it gets dribbled on it. Okay, on a much more serious note, I can't sugarcoat this, folks. We've recently had a loss here at the Jim Hill Media family. Brian Gaughan, my co-host on the Looking at Lucasfilm podcast, had a cardiac event on June 20th. And just a few days after that, Brian Gaughan was gone. Look, my sincerest apologies for deliberately sitting on this news for the past few weeks, but the Gaughan family, his lovely wife Leanna, Brian's son Devin, and his daughter Brianna were just blindsided by this tragic event. And before I went public with this info, I wanted to give the Gaughan family time to grieve. Anyway, just this past week, Leanna finally officially gave me permission to share this info with you guys. And please know that in the weeks ahead, we'll be posting a special tribute show here on the Jim Hill Media Network. I've got lots of stories to share about my friend of 25 years. And miss you, Brian. I mean, I love that you went out doing what you love to do. Mr. Gaughan was actually walking into Universal Studios Hollywood when this happened. He was on his way to take part in the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Jaws, which was Brian's absolute favorite film in the world, when his heart just stopped. Anyway, again, look for a show shortly that celebrates one of the sweetest, kindest people to ever walk on this planet, and that was Brian Gaughan. Anyway, this is Jim Hill, and on behalf of Len Testa, who I promise will be back here next week, thanks for listening to Disney Dish, and we will see you on the next show.